It's one of those days that I can't wait to get started. I got some great things to share with you today on Pastor Bob's Coffee Break. This is a cool mug. Beautiful. My friend Andrew from Blues Truckers, that t-shirt that I showed you a couple weeks ago, sent me this. Isn't that cool? Beautiful. I love that slogan. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that very much. So here's the question for today. Dear Pastor Bob, why is it that human beings tend to resist intimacy instead of embracing it? We say, how are you, but we don't even mean it or listen for the answer. That's so true, isn't it? So why is it? Why do we tend to resist intimacy? Intimacy is hard. And we've defined intimacy many times as into me see. Seeing into me, intimacy. It's a difficult thing because it makes us very vulnerable. But it's exactly the nature of human beings. And it's what sets us apart from the animal kingdom, and it's what sets Christians apart, at least it's supposed to, from the average person, that we have intimacy because of him, and because of what he's done, and because of whose we are now. But we do this. We say, how are you? And when people ask that, and I actually give an answer, sometimes they're surprised. And then I see people doing it every day, and they're not listening for an answer. And it's an American thing. I understand that as I travel the world, people don't do this in other countries, but we do here. They think it's kind of strange, and it is. How are you? How are you? It's just a way of saying hello, and we don't really even mean how are you. So when we really want to know, what do? Well, I think if we add one word, it creates intimacy. How are you is ambiguous. It's how am I, what do you mean? How are my finances? How am I emotionally? How am I spiritually? How am I this moment? What does it actually mean? How do we define that? And I think we really have to define that. So how are you? Really needs to be, how are you today? Or how are you now? How are you in this area? Be specific and intend for it to lead to some intimacy. Into me, see. Let it be a real conversation starter that begins with you actually caring about another person. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So intimacy, what does it involve? Well, it isn't just saying, how are you? It's using eye contact, and I've talked to people that I'll have a 5-minute conversation with them and they've never really looked me in the eyes. And their head is always down, not up. Eye contact. It means something to people when you look them in the eye and you say something meaningful to them from your heart. That's the fastest way to touch somebody else. Or touch, physical touch. I have this thing where I kind of touch somebody's, like their elbow, upper arm, that spot right there. I've been doing that for years, just as a point of context. And people make fun of me, that I'm the elbow guy. But it's a place where you're not so vulnerable, but it's still touching. And I like to make that contact. And I hate the coronavirus because I'm not able to make contact or hug people. And I'm used to doing that. It's hard. And then countenance. What does my countenance say? When I say, how are you? And people read my face and they know I didn't really mean that question, they're not going to answer it. But what if my countenance, what my facial expressions say, actually back up my question? How are you today? See, that's a different thing. And so what God asks us to do is have a heart of caring. To have a heart that really does want and need intimacy, that really does want to get to the bottom of the problem. We quote all kinds of scriptural references and stories. The story of the Good Samaritan is one that you all know. And yet, sometimes we don't quite get it. It's a Sunday school teacher years ago that had 4 and 5-year-old children, and she was telling the story of the Good Samaritan, and she was trying to make it as graphic as she could for 4 and 5-year-olds to kind of keep their attention. And they were riveted. Their eyes were glued on her, and she said, "So, if you saw a person that was laying by the side of the road and was bleeding and was injured and wounded, what would you do?" And they were all silent. And then one little girl bravely spoke up and said, "I think I'd throw up." And I think a lot of people would. She was being honest. But what would you do? What if we were in that situation with somebody like the Good Samaritan who picks the person up and cares for them? Here's the scripture that I want to share with you today. John 13, 34 and 35. It says, "I am giving you a new commandment." Jesus says that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you too are to love one another. He says, I want you to agape one another. Now, we're real good at other forms of love that don't really mean anything or don't go very far, some that are based on sex instead of anything else. But when we talk about real love, God's love, agape love, that's a different thing. And he says, so I have a new commandment, that you agape one another. Just as I have agaped you, you agape each other. And then he goes on and he says, by this, everyone will know that you're my disciples. This is the distinguishing factor. It's not what you say. It's not like you're saying, how are you? And you don't really mean it. It's not that there are just words coming out of your mouth. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. He said it's because of this agape, this love, that people will know that you're my disciples. Isn't that cool? And it says they'll know you're my disciples if, here's one of those if clauses, 1,522 times in the Bible there's an if clause. It's cause and effect. If you agape, then what? If you have love for each other and concern for each other, unselfish concern. That's how they'll know you're my disciples, if you have that kind of love and unselfish concern for one another. They see you doing it with one another, they'll trust you to do it with them. So it's the best way to begin to love people, agape people, is to truly care, to truly show that you care, and to use God's agape love. And then we embrace the intimacy instead of resisting it. Then we realize what a gift it is, not just to us who are giving it, but those who are receiving it. It's a double thing. It's a win-win. So don't forget, you are blessed and you are beautiful. That's cool, isn't it? So go and be a blessing.